Hello, and welcome to the Weird Waves podcast. My name is Taylor, and this is episode 31. On this week's episode, we talked to Stacie Vanags. She is a podcaster and the host of the Salted Spirit podcast, among many other things. She's also a tea connoisseur, and she works in the mental health sector. This is a great podcast with another podcaster. It's always interesting to talk to someone who also enjoys interviewing people. It is very clear to me through this interview that the main theme in her life since starting surfing has been ocean protection and sustainability. She has worked with the Surfrider Foundation. Her podcast is about women who surf, but there is definitely a thread of eco-friendly activity and sustainability throughout it. It's really interesting to hear her talk about how she came to the conclusion of having this main focus in her life. She also talks about her love for tea, and I learned a lot about tea in this episode, which is not what I was expecting. So I really hope that you guys enjoy this week's episode as much as I did. I guess let's start, maybe introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hey, I am Stacie Vanags. I'm the host of the Salted Spirit podcast, and I'm here in Los Angeles in Culver City.
And where did you grow up?
I actually grew up in northwest Wisconsin in a little town called Rice Lake, and then I actually moved to Minneapolis and then Chicago, and then met my husband in Chicago, and we've been out in LA going on 8 years now.
That's awesome. What did you go to school in Wisconsin?
Yeah, I actually went to a small university for psychology, and then I ended up randomly going to Chicago to get a degree in fashion design.
Oh, wow.
I was like, I need something a little bit more creative. I've been working in the corporate world for several years and just wanted some more creativity in my life. So yeah, I got my degree in fashion and actually had a line out in Los Angeles for a couple of years, my own line that was sourced locally and produced locally here. And so that was quite a trip and an introduction to business and all things fashion.
Where did you go to fashion school? I'm in Chicago right now.
Oh, so. Okay, yeah. Institute of Art, Chicago, right downtown.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, awesome. That's so cool. That's so interesting. So what made you go from fashion and then back to what you are doing now?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I love to tell this story, and I'm glad you asked. In Chicago, I don't recall a single class or even a conversation about fashion and sustainability or fashion and its impact on the environment. Mm-hmm. And when I moved out to Los Angeles and just randomly started surfing, that looks like red wine in your cup, by the way, and it's like 7 in the morning.
It's coffee. It is coffee for everyone.
Okay, man, what time is it?
It is 9:30, and this is coffee.
Okay,
just checking. I'm not drinking during our interview.
That's interesting. So it's like hindsight is 2020 because I'm just plugging along, doing my thing, creating my designs. I'm out in LA, loving life. Fashion was definitely one of the most difficult things that I've ever done, just from a demand standpoint and a financial standpoint, because there's so many things you have to invest in. Mm-hmm. And I was just bootstrapping it all, like, fabric, sourcing, manufacturing, shipping, all kinds of stuff. But then I started surfing, and I started to develop this relationship with the ocean and with the water and with the environment that was really, honestly, unexpected. When I first started surfing, it was kind of like, oh yeah, that'd be fun. We should try that. My husband was like, let's go try that. And I was like, yeah, I grew up in the Midwest. Like I grew up swimming and fishing and, in the rivers and lakes. So surfing, I'll probably be okay at surfing, which obviously none of those skills translated even
right
to the ocean. And I just got my butt kicked for like 3 years consistently. But that was really the start of the journey where I started to see things with the environment, specifically when the first flush happened. And for those that don't know what the first flush is, that's the first big rain in Los Angeles after, it's a desert out here. We were in a drought for many years, so we don't get a lot of rain. And so everything is just stagnant in the streets and, even up the watershed. So when it rains, everything pushes out. And that's things that are visible, from plastic pollution and trash to the things that aren't visible to the naked eye, like toxins and chemicals and agriculture runoff and all kinds of crazy, nasty things. And surfers can get really sick if you surf after a rain. So when I learned about that, my eyes were just open to so many things. And that's when I started volunteering with Surfrider Foundation, and it just snowballed from there, all the things that I learned about the environment. And that's when it was more of a moral decision for me. Like, I don't think I can put another pair of cool sweatpants like out in the environment. Like, it just didn't feel like it was something that we needed. And I know there's a lot of brands out there working on sustainability and, using recycled plastics and all kinds of things. And I really commend them, because it's really hard to navigate. It's not easy. So for the fashion brands that go above and beyond to really do their research and due diligence, I commend them, because I just was like, yeah, I can't do this anymore. And that's actually when I switched from fashion and just kind of dissolved my business, excuse me, to deciding to do the podcast and still have a way to do something creative, but that I felt like was making a really positive impact on the world.
So were you always, you kind of told me in the beginning that you have been practicing is it a counselor position, or it's like a therapist position?
So I actually work in mental health and substance abuse.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Yeah. But it's in more of a sales position. So this is another quick story. I'll try not to tangent too much, but it was my first job, and I actually worked in a crisis center where I was taking incoming calls from members who were in any type of behavioral crisis, whether it was substance abuse issues or suicidal, or maybe they just wanted to quote regular benefits and get access to a counselor. I was the person on the other end of that line. And at that point, I was enrolled to get my master's degree in counseling. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to be a counselor and I'm going to help people. And after doing that job for a year and just heavy burnout and realizing I'm too sensitive of a person, instead of going the clinical route, I went the business route. So I went the side that supports clients and employers. So my job for my entire career of 16 years has been working with companies and corporations to educate them on how to use their mental health benefits. So just like you have, medical and dental and pharmacy and all those like benefits in your benefit package, most people also have mental health benefits, but most people don't know they have it until they need it. So that's been my job, is really to train those people, train human resources and employees, and letting them know it's there, how to get free resources and support. So that's been my role in the mental health world.
And so you were doing that also while you were studying fashion and while you had your own brand?
Yep. Yeah.
Wow, that's cool. That's a lot.
Yeah, it was fashion school was night school, so it was every night for 3 years. Or I mean, it was not every night, but it was nightly school for 3 years. But it was by far the most fun and creative thing I've ever done in my life. I learned all the creative suite programs. I was probably the oldest person in my class at that point, when I was in my 30s, and everyone was also like 21 and pretty young. So it was fun to be just exposed to like a different demographic of people and learn from kids younger than me, and have to create patterns and learn to sew and create, our final senior project was this massive senior collection. So I ended up doing something that was really unlike me. It was like super medieval and like heavy red velvets, and this like one of the projects I'm really proud of that I actually haven't thought about in many years. But it was a lot of late nights and like late night sewing. Everyone thinks fashion is like this really sexy thing, and like the amount of work that goes into it is pretty tremendous. So
yeah. From your perspective, now that you have worked in that industry and you see sustainability being a trend, do you see that there are more brands that are really doing it right, or more brands that are putting the label on it as sustainable, but when you look into it, it's not really like that?
Yeah, I think The greenwashing thing is real, and it's really difficult sometimes because everyone now, so many people say they are a sustainable brand, and I think it's really trying to dig into that and ask them the right questions about how are they sustainable, what kind of fabrics are they sourcing, what kind of resources are they using, where do their workers live, what are the conditions. I think it's a really difficult thing to navigate in general because everyone's kind of like sustainable now, because they really have to be. I think consumers are so smart now and they're so selective and for the most part getting better about trying to make better decisions. And so they're pressing on people more to ask those questions of where things come from. But I think it's still a really difficult thing to navigate. So even when my friend works in the cosmetics industry, and the things that I've learned from her in passing as far as like where the mica comes from and the sparkles, that sparkle in your blush, and like the child labor and all the things around that, it's something that like a lot of people, we just don't think about because make at our fingertips and you've got your great blush that you love or your eyeshadows. So there's a story, similar to what you're doing, just extracting these stories. There's stories all over the world of where our products come from. And I think it's important to try to continue to get to those roots and understand and learn more.
When you started surfing, you said it was unexpected for you to have this nature kind of, I don't know, love or understanding. Can you maybe talk through that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Growing up in the Midwest, I didn't grow up in an environment where we really were sustainability or the environment was at the forefront of my particular environment, or that was something we even talked about or were concerned with. I think it was just a simple, small town life, which is cool, but it just wasn't, California is so different because we really lead with that kind of conversation. And so I just didn't think about driving a car, or what kind of impact that had, or why should I care about the ocean? Like I didn't live near an ocean in Wisconsin, those kinds of things. So it was just a new type of conversation and dialogue for me. I think living in this state, it's just a different type of tool. Like I think about California as this great learning tool, just because I'm sandwiched right now between the ocean and the mountains, and just learning to protect what I love, learning more about the ocean every day. I think the ocean is our greatest teacher, or whatever it is that you love or you're into. For me, it's the ocean. So I learn something literally every time I slide into the water. I feel like there's always a lesson kind of being divvied up for me. So.
And when you started surfing, was it an instant, like, kind of connection for you, or was it a slower build?
Definitely not an instant connection. I think it was, I just remember, like, I think my husband trying to, like, push me into waves at Venice. And Venice is brutal anyway. It's very unforgiving. It's a punchy beach break. There was a lot of curling and, like, face planting and just taking in a lot of water. And I remember thinking, like, why am I doing this? Like, this isn't fun. Like, I'm swallowing so much water. I feel like I'm going to die. But I don't know if it was the competitiveness in me. I have 3 older brothers, and so I'm the only girl and the youngest, and just not giving up and feeling like, man, I want to get better at this, or I want to keep trying. And something, I can't even tell you exactly what it is, but something kept drawing me back. And I met a really great group of girls that I started surfing with, and we were all at the same level, pretty new. So I formed this camaraderie and this bond. And I mentioned when we started, like, I work from home. So part of me, I was really isolated. It was just my husband and I that moved out here. We didn't have any immediate family other than his brother. So I was just craving community and something fun and interesting to do. And it happened to be surfing. And then I met these girls. And I think when you really put the time in with surfing or whatever sport that you love or you're interested in trying or getting better at, it really gives back to you. And as you start to make these improvements or you learn a new skill, it's motivation and inspiration to just keep going and keep learning. And like, oh my gosh, I turned today, or I actually stood up, and that's what riding a wave actually feels like. Like, I swear it took me 2 years to like actually ride a wave, like a legit wave. So, yeah, it was not something that I immediately fell in love with. It was kind of a fickle thing. Like, what is my obsession with this weird thing that I'm so bad at, but I'm just going to keep going. So,
It's a funny thing, surfing, because it is so difficult. And then if you start like later in life, I feel anyone that starts after even 20, it's like your body just doesn't really know what to do.
yeah, totally. Totally.
But I think in some way, those are the people that I'm seeing that really become obsessed with it because it's such a challenge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I do think the age thing is important because I was in my 30s trying to learn, and you see all these young kids out there surfing. And I remember thinking, like, am I too old to do this? Like, why am I trying to learn this crazy sport in my 30s? But then the beautiful thing is you see people like in their 60s and 70s surfing, and it's a reminder that there shouldn't be any kind of requirement or expectations of age put on anything. Like, we can do anything we want at any age if we put our mind to it. So I think that that is something I really love about Southern California is it's very inclusive, and there's so much like weirdness, and people just do whatever they want. So like you fit in no matter what you're doing, and there's less judgment about age or whatever. So I think that was something that kept me going when I see people much older than me in the lineup just having fun and laughing and surfing well. And I was like, okay, you know what? I can do this. I'm not going to say I can't do this just because I'm 30 or too old to surf.
And how did you get involved with the Surfrider Foundation?
Yeah, good question. So it was really all related to that whole conversation about runoff and having surfed for a few years and being like, man, I really love this sport. And then picking up plastic and trash in the ocean and kind of like shoving it in my wetsuit when I was surfing and starting to see a connection about how dirty the ocean was. I was like, man, I should probably do something. I should probably give back in some capacity to this thing that I have grown to love so much. So I'm like, I should just volunteer. And I set a goal that I was going to research 3 organizations and then figure out one to volunteer with. And I ended up having coffee with the former chair. Her name's Tina. And she told me all about Surfrider. And I had like my little notebook, list of questions for her. And after that date, I was like, oh, nope, I'm sold. Like, I'm all in with Surfrider. Just felt like my people. And I just started showing up and just going to beach cleanups. And I was part of it's called Ocean Friendly Restaurants program, where we go around and we audit different restaurants to try to get them to be quote unquote ocean friendly. So they have to meet different guidelines. We try to give suggestions as far as consumer products, takeaway products that they're putting out in the environment that are not plastic or better options. And then eventually I stepped into the chapter chair role. So I did that for 2 years, sat on the executive board, and that was one of by far my greatest privileges to date in my life is serving on the executive board. It was from 2017 to 2019. So it's typically a 2-year term. So I just wrapped up that term. Feels a little bittersweet to like step off. And I had, it was a little difficult at the same time. The new chair is amazing. It's nice to have fresh faces and fresh blood and fresh energy and perspective. And Surfrider is not going anywhere. Anyone can volunteer. You don't have to be a surfer to volunteer with Surfrider. There's really something for everyone, and they're always out at the beach and cleaning up or just having fun, getting together and forming community. And so that's kind of how I got involved. It was just by happenstance.
That's so cool. And what is the main purpose of Surfrider?
Yeah. So the main mission is really the protection of the oceans, beaches, and waves. The protection and enjoyment, that's an important part. Protection and enjoyment of the world's oceans, beaches, and waves. So it was formed initially up in Malibu about 35 years ago from a couple of surfers that were just trying to protect their local break. Sorry, getting a little bit of feedback there.
Oh, that's okay.
Oh, okay. So it's formed up in Malibu by a couple of local surfers that were just trying to protect their local break. and it really snowballed into this now international nonprofit organization. So it's primarily a volunteer-run organization. So when you see people out on the streets or at the beaches cleaning up, it's pretty much the majority of just volunteers and good people coming to help out. So it's a pretty great and vast organization. And one of the biggest things is really just fighting, local issues or fighting issues at the local level. So whether it's banning plastic bags in Los Angeles or working to reduce, single-use plastics here, protecting different parts of the coast, opening it up for public access. They're really fighting all kinds of initiatives and trying to just get access for everyone to enjoy the beach while protecting it.
That's awesome. That is great. We have a chapter here in Chicago too.
I've heard of that.
Yeah. They just they filed and won a lawsuit against one of the biggest polluters on Lake Michigan, and a bunch of surfers actually got sick from a specific spill, and
wow.
They won. It's like
amazing.
It is amazing. It's really cool. The
Which
surf
was that, or what was that, so I can look it up?
It was yes, I believe it was in Whiting. I'll have to double check.
Okay.
I know it was a chromium 6 spill, and I don't know how many people were affected exactly, but yeah, they sued and won. So that's pretty. It was
huge victory.
Yeah, it was a big achievement because in this area, first of all, for a lot of us, it was the first time people had even heard about surfing on the lake.
Yeah.
And then to realize that people got sick was very eye-opening for people that aren't even involved in surfing. So the Surfrider Foundation in this area, that's what they're known for sure.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I love hearing that. Yeah, it's funny how I never signed up to or thought of myself as an activist. And when you just kind of find yourself all of a sudden in that role or learning about a local issue like you're talking about in Chicago, and then you go to a city council meeting and you're speaking on behalf of kind of the surfing community, or maybe you're someone who got sick, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, I'm using my voice. I'm an activist. Just kind of, it's a beautiful thing. And I think there's kind of stereotypes around what it takes to be an activist, but anyone can be an activist in just their day-to-day actions and really make a positive impact. So it's a pretty cool thing.
Totally. Let's talk maybe about the podcast.
Yeah.
This is so cool. So you started the podcast when?
Yeah, so I started the podcast a little over 2 years ago. I think it's been about 2.5 years ago. And it was really the result of dissolving the fashion side and the fashion business and trying to think about what I could do to still get creative and be creative. And to be honest, part of it was, I put so much time and money and going to school for fashion design into that. It was like, oh, am I doing the wrong thing? Am I pulling the plug too early? I had a lot of doubt and possible regret about not trying to hang on to fashion longer or do it better or be more sustainable. So it was kind of this weird thing. And I told myself, okay, instead of just worrying about me, or my ego or whatever about fashion and was it too early and did I not do the right thing, I was like, I'm just going to halt all those negative conversations in my brain and turn the tables and just focus on other women. What are other women doing out there? How can I tell their stories? I was in a place where I was obviously super stoked on surfing, and it just kind of evolved. And honestly, my husband encouraged me to start the podcast, and I was like, oh God, I don't want to listen to my voice. Voice is going to be terrible. But I just started it, and I'm not a person who's a perfectionist and who will research everything to death and all the equipment. I'm just like, I'm going to just try and see what happens, and it'll get better. Otherwise, you just never start, right? So I just did a couple episodes, and it was really the criteria that I wanted to make sure I stuck to was interviewing women, because I felt like there weren't enough stories of women, specifically water women. Most of it was all male surfers. And so I was only interviewing women who were doing something to what I call, defy the status quo, what's expected of us as women. and also leaving a positive imprint on the ocean. So I'm kind of like giving away a secret here, but the underlying theme that I really wanted was environmental activism or influence, but I knew if I came out with that podcast name that it would attract such a small subset of people. So I've really just woven in at the end of each interview, like, hey, what's one thing we can do today to like make a positive impact on the ocean? So it's not the whole basis of the podcast, but it's really hearing stories of women from, Portugal and France and Spain and South Africa and Australia and here in the US, and how we're all connected to our local water resources. And then it's not just the ocean, it's fresh water, it's rivers and lakes. And I've been reading a lot of stories lately of Indigenous women and all these things about plant medicine. And I just keep hearing like the women were the keepers of the water. Historically, we've always been the ones to protect the water, to bring the water to the tribes and do all these things. And so like even in 2020, I feel like we need to be the keepers of the water because we're really the positive voices for that. So that was really the basis of the podcast. I took a little bit of a break when I was chairing for Surfrider just because I just couldn't do everything physically, like work full time, do the podcast and chair. So I still did the podcast in last year, but I think I only did 8 episodes in 2019. So I just tried to kind of like keep it afloat, keep it alive. But I just really put it on the back burner. And now in 2020, I'm doing a weekly episode. So my goal was to interview 50 of the most amazing water women around the world, and primarily trying to tap into other countries just to continue to bring in different cultures and perspectives outside of the US. And so, yeah, it's been so far just really, really amazing. It's definitely been a hustle doing a weekly episode. And I was like, oh my gosh, can I do this? I can't believe I'm saying this out loud because then I'm going to have to commit to it. I said it on Instagram. Now I'm, committed. But I can't even tell you how rewarding it has been. So it's still a passion project. So I don't like make any money off the podcast. I don't even have sponsors. A lot of people ask me that. So we'll see where it goes in this coming year. But as of now, I have faith that it'll just continue to do something good and be positive stories for people around the world. So
how has it changed from the beginning to what it is now?
Yeah. I think part of it is just for me as the host, really learning to get better as asking more thoughtful questions, being a better listener. It's just kind of sharpened my skills as a human. I like to say I've always been a pretty good listener, but I can tell you, especially now that I host the podcast when I can, when people are coming through LA out of my old surf van. It's a 1985 Westfalia Vanags, and her name is Salted Carmela.
Oh.
Yeah, so I've turned my old surf van into a mobile studio. And so I have like a working propane stove, and I usually meet my guests at Venice Beach, pop up the top, make some tea and have the microphones ready. And what I found, I just started doing that really this year, is that I actually am required to be that much better of a listener when I'm sitting like 2 feet from someone, because I don't have a computer screen in between me. I can't get distracted. I can't really look at my notes. Like I just have to be fully present. And it's been great. Part of it's a little uncomfortable because I just like really have to be on and make sure the conversation's still really fluid. I don't really edit those episodes at all, and I record video the whole time. So really, how has it changed? It's just continued to be about my own skills and how can I extract the best stories and ask really thoughtful questions. And I do think it started out, well, one thing that has really changed actually, with regards to the content on the podcast, it started out as like, yeah, this surfy, cool podcast of people who surf, women, and what are their inspiring stories, and that's amazing. And it's been life-changing for me. But the thing that I find is that the conversations around mental health and women's wellness and anxiety and depression and all these things, when women are able to share those types of stories, and sometimes how the ocean or how water is used as therapy, or maybe they went through a hard time, and they're able to expose those kinds of things and willing to be brave enough and courageous enough to have that conversation and really share it with the world, that has completely changed my podcast, because it went from something that was kind of simple on paper, like here are my objectives and here's what I want to accomplish in these conversations, to people asking me more, like to continue to talk more about mental health. And I always kept like my two worlds really separate. I kept my big girl job and mental health separate, and I didn't really talk about it much. And then I had my creative stuff like surfing and the podcast and Surfrider. And then I realized like these are not two different things. Like this is all one world that I need to incorporate together. So one of my goals now on every episode is to try to dive into some aspect of wellness for water women. And I've also been doing these live van events at the beach with like a live podcast type of environment and feel, which incorporates mental health as well.
That's really, really interesting. How you're in such a unique position because of your choice of what you studied, and now to relate it to surfing. It's just really cool.
Thank you.
Have you, what have you like stayed away from, I guess? Like what maybe you did in the beginning, or you tried this thing, but it didn't really work out?
That's a good question. Let me think about that. I think the one thing that's been difficult is not interviewing guys. Like I know that there's so many amazing men out there that have great stories, and sometimes I feel like kind of sexist because I only interview women. That was always the goal, is to keep this niche, but part of me feels bummed, like, because there's a lot of amazing men out there. I want to share their stories, like Tommy, Chicago surfer. You probably know Tommy, and he was on your podcast. And so, but I struggle with that because I'm trying to stick to this niche, and I think there's a really powerful thing that happens in a kind of a safe community with just women. But also, I've had so much support from guys listening and commenting and saying like, hey, I really enjoy your podcast, and it helps them understand the women in their life better also when they're hearing stories. But I'm just really grateful for that community of guys that listens also. And that's been something that I've continued to struggle with. So what I did to refine that a little bit was I asked guys for audio submissions in the beginning. So to just give me, a 1-minute clip of like, hey, where are you in the world calling in from? What kind of shenanigans are you getting into as far as salty or freshwater shenanigans? And like, what do you want to hear in the podcast? So I've had a couple guys call in, Tommy being one of them. And I love now to be able to incorporate a snippet of where they are. I can give them a shout out on Instagram and on the podcast without compromising my original goals.
That's really cool. That's very cool. What kind of sponsorship opportunities have you been offered? I only ask this because I just think it's really interesting to see what happens. I think there's an idea from the listener perspective that once you get X amount of followers, you have X amount of opportunities. So I'm curious what you have experienced.
Yeah, so as far as sponsorships, that's something I started exploring really in 2020 to say, okay, I'm kind of going to do this now. It's weekly. I've actually historically edited all my own podcasts, but it's for the last 2 years. But now being weekly, I'm like, I think I need to outsource some things just to keep it going. And I'm just bootstrapping it again and paying for it myself. So I did start exploring sponsorships. It's not, I wouldn't say like sponsors are knocking at my door to try to say like, can we sponsor the podcast? And I'm really particular about the types of companies I want to work with, because I want to make sure they align with my goals and my beliefs, like being a sustainable brand. And there's a lot of, I get a lot of people that reach out and try to send me free stuff because of the podcast, or it's not sponsorships, but it's like product. And I 90% of the time politely say no, thank you, just because it's things that, again, I don't know where they're sourced from. They just don't make sense with my goals. But part of me so I haven't actually gotten any sponsorships. I've vetted a couple of companies, but it's an early conversation for me. So I might have to come back to you on that, because I don't really have an answer for you yet. It's the first time I've explored it. But I also feel like I don't like to do what everyone else is doing. And pretty much every other podcast has sponsors. And the people I've talked to that I've vetted it with, they're like, we just don't see a lot of ROI as a result of us sponsoring podcasts. We've sponsored them in the past and can do a giveaway for you, but like we don't see ROI from podcasts. And I was like, yeah, that kind of makes sense. I can see that. So I'm still figuring this part out where I'm just like, Stacie, just because every other podcast, like the Joe Rogan show, has sponsors, like doesn't mean you have to do it like everyone else. So I'll be honest, I don't totally have answers, Taylor. I'm still really navigating that space and trying to figure out my strategy around that.
I think it's difficult. We've kind of had this like a similar experience. We've had a couple of offers, but mostly we've just stayed away from it. I think my biggest fear is, and I don't know if maybe you can relate to this, but it's like what are the premises for the sponsorship and how is that going to affect how I talk to people?
Yeah. You're going to be required to change your dialogue
That's the thing that kind of like was concerning. But it's just interesting to hear other people's perspectives because of course, I mean, it costs money to do this, basically. Like, it's worth it.
It's like money. Yeah.
Yeah, like any hobby, it's totally worth it, but it does cost money. So it's just interesting. It has been interesting for me to hear other people's perspectives on that topic.
Yeah, no, it's like if you take in investors in your company, like they're going to dictate certain things and how you run your company. And it's always a little bit of a dilemma, because it's like, well, it's my company, it's my baby. Do I want to let someone else dictate how I do things because now they have stakes in the game? So it's the same thing with the podcast. Yeah, it's an interesting conversation. I think it's something I appreciate that you asked about it because sometimes people are closed-lipped about things or sponsorships or money or how we're doing things. And I think we need to talk more openly about it and share resources and experience so we can all help each other out,
Yeah, I think talking about it too makes everybody more understanding because I think there's an assumption of like if I talk about X product, then it must be a sponsorship. And because the line has been kind of so blurred between I'm getting paid for this or I get this sent for free or whatever, that I think that, again, with a consumer that is more knowledgeable, the more people talk about things, the more people can kind of understand that whatever we say, if we don't have a sponsor, is what we mean.
Yep, so. I agree.
You said a couple minutes ago when you were explaining the podcast that it's women living outside of society's perspectives, or how do you define that?
Yeah, I think just kind of the expectation and again, just growing up in a smaller, intimate community, it's this is always a little bit of a sensitive topic, but kind of the expectations of like you get a job, you get a corporate job, or you get a job, you get married, you buy the house, you have the kids, you get the cars, you kind of have all the things, and there's this progression of boxes that you're checking. And my husband and I just have never checked that box. Like we actually sometimes find it difficult to find couples that are like us because we're so atypical and we don't really check any of those boxes. And so it's just women that, and it's a lot of times it's not saying like not to have children, but women that maybe have kids and are still doing like have surf mamas, started surf mamas or are doing things that are still serving the greater community. And for me, again, not having kids, I can only imagine, and I have so much respect for these women who like are raising little humans and they're also giving of their time and working on, somehow serving the community. So it's just not checking all those boxes and letting women know that they don't have to fit into societal norms and there's other things you can do. And, like the story of, I had my friend Kristen, her Instagram is Samba to the Sea, and she had like the dream job in New York and the flat and was in finance and was so deeply unhappy and just decided she went on a surf trip to Costa Rica and was like, man, I really love it here. Gave up her flat, quit her job, obviously was responsible and like saved up and had a plan, but she's been living in Costa Rica for like 7 years. So that's an example of, you know, not just going through life doing what you think that you should do for yourself, or what your spouse wants, or what your parents wanted, or whatever, whoever you're trying to please out there, but really being true and authentic to yourself and doing what makes you happy. And sometimes it's being uncomfortable, maybe having a lot less money, or having a lot less stuff, or not speaking the language. And not saying everyone has to move to Costa Rica to be happy, but just really searching inside to figure out, like, what is it that you're stoked about? Like, what do you want out of this life? Like, we have such a short amount of time on this planet. Like, what do you want to do that's awesome and that makes you happy every day? So it's really digging deeper into those stories and inspiring other women to know that it's okay. And, you know, this is an easy conversation for like women here, maybe in the States, but also women who don't have these natural privileges or natural independence in other countries where they definitely don't have that. You know, they are, you know, the example I'm thinking of is in Sri Lanka with Sea Sister Sri Lanka. They're working to give free surf lessons to the locals, the local women and the local children, to one, teach them how to swim, you know, empower these women, give them independence, give them courage. And because historically the traditional roles in Sri Lanka are to stay home and tend to the household and to cook and to raise the children. And they don't even really, sometimes there's things like they don't even really go outside because they want to stay lighter skinned. They don't want to be exposed to the sun all the time. So being at the beach all the time might be looked at as negative. And I'm paraphrasing again, just based on the amazing episode I had with Amanda. But these are, depending on where these women are in the world, where they live, it's trying to navigate this like pretty difficult sometimes conversation for women. And how can I, as a white woman who's very privileged here in the States, help other women around the world and other countries that don't have that type of freedom or independence? Like, what can I do today to try to help that? And if that's falling in love with the ocean and teaching them to surf, like, I want to be part of that.
That's a great explanation. That you really that's it's very interesting. And I think surfers are so unique for that. Like, I think there's something about surfing that it, for whatever reason, and it's not just surfing, of course, but especially with surfing, that it just changes that light bulb in so many people.
Yeah. It's like it rewires your DNA or something. You just like, you never can go back. You're rewired in your brain, and you're just like, okay, I guess this is me now. I like can't unsee this or can't undo this, and like, okay, I'm just gonna embrace it.
So what kind of boards are you riding?
Yeah, so I have a funny board. It's a 6'6", kind of a fat, like 3-inch rails. I call it like a cheater board because I got it used at Rider Shack, one of the local surf shops here. I always get my boards used. And it was shaped for a guy here. His name's Gordo, and I think he gets a lot of boards shaped, but then he kind of resells them. And it has been like such a fun board because it's shorter but rides like a longboard. So I can get into literally any wave, anywhere. When I was in the Maldives a couple of years ago, all the women had like really, really short potato chip boards. And I just like sink on those boards. Like I don't even know how they get into waves. And I'm riding kind of this longish board, you know? And I could literally catch every single wave in the Maldives. I didn't because I was scared to death that I was going to die. But and one of the tricks is like, the disadvantage for me is that I can't duck dive this board. So especially in the Maldives, I would freak out when I took a wave and got caught on the inside. I could never paddle back through. I'd have to paddle all the way around the channel. But my coach said to me one day, because there was a coach with us, he was like, well, would you rather be able to duck dive or catch more waves? Like, what's more important? Because I was like, oh, I can't duck dive. And he was like, who cares? You're catching waves. Like, that's the whole point of being here. The more waves you catch, the better surfer you're going to be. So paddle around the channel. And I was like, okay. That makes sense. So I just my board randomly is called Briggs. Like, I don't know where that name came from, but it's like my go-to board. And then I also won this beautiful longboard a couple of years ago. It's a 9.6 longboard. Her name is Ruby. And I'm trying to get more confidence learning to longboard. I'm 5'3" and just petite. So the longboards kind of scare me because they're so big and overwhelming. And I feel like I'm going to kill somebody in the lineup because I like need to learn to control my board. But I just signed up for a surf trip in Nicaragua with Travelers Surf Club. They're doing a trip down there in May, and it's a 5-day longboarding surf trip. So taught by Julie Cox. She's a professional longboarder, and her partner, Rel. And they're doing this combo of longboarding, like a creative workshop type of thing. So I'm pretty excited. I'm kind of like going to force myself to really immerse myself with longboarding and embrace it a little bit more because it always looks so beautiful and graceful and like, oh, I want to walk the nose and cross step, but I got to put the time in, you know? So it's this new skill I'm trying to develop. So those are really the two main boards in my quiver right now.
If you're not surfing, what are you doing?
Oh man, so many things.
Other than working, I guess.
Yeah,
I should put that out there.
So what I'm trying to do more of is just cross training. So I try to mix up my workouts, and I've been doing a lot of Pilates, and it's the machine Pilates, the Mega Transformer. I have a lot of lower back issues, so I realized after surfing a lot of times I was like in a lot of pain and discomfort, like my lower back, but it turns out that my core is just really not strong. So I've had to work backwards and really work to strengthen my core. So I try to cross train with Pilates and just running stairs and kind of stretching and doing yoga. I'm really lazy about stretching and lazy about doing yoga, and I know it's so good for our bodies, and so I try to get better about that. But one thing I'm doing, not related to like working out or editing my podcast or whatever, is just reading. Like, I'm just trying to spend more quiet time reading. And so right now I'm reading a book called Braiding Sweetgrass, and I was telling you a little bit about it, about stories from Indigenous women, and I'm really interested in learning about plant medicine. I'm really into blending my own teas. So I'm just trying to read. I try to get up every morning at 5 and read for like 30 minutes and journal before my workday starts, or before, sometimes I have early morning podcasts. So that's something that I'm doing in my downtime, trying to prioritize more.
What is the weirdest wave that you have ever surfed?
Yeah, I was thinking about this because you sent this ahead of time, and I think when I think about weird, I thought about this party wave that I caught a couple of years ago in Rincon, which is this epic, iconic spot up in kind of Ventura County. And there were 7 of us on it, just because party waving, like, it's fun, but a lot of times people are kind of selfish in the water. Like, they don't want to share waves. They want the wave to themselves, like, get out of my way. They call each other off the waves. And there's this thing called the Rincon Invitational, and it's a competition, but it's a fun competition, and you get points for the more people on a party wave, the more points you get. And like, if you can have each other or hold hands or do a skit, like, you get extra points. And so on behalf of Surfrider, we were competing, and I remember there were like 7 of us up on the wave, and it was the most fun and the most weird experience I ever had, because usually you don't all want to be on the same wave, but everyone was waiting for each other to try to get up and not crash. And that was the weirdest wave I ever took, and by far the most fun wave. And I have this picture in my head because someone caught it on camera, and there's like 7 of us dotted along the waves in orange rash guards, and we're all just like cheering, and it was so much fun. Yeah.
What was your biggest scare moment, your oh shit moment while surfing?
Definitely had that. Everybody usually has those. It was just at Venice Beach, like the break I go to all the time. I was pretty new, and my parents happened to be in town. They were sitting on the beach, although I don't even think they knew where I was in the water. They don't swim and probably weren't paying attention. But I was out there with my husband, and Venice can actually get really big, and it closes out. And I happened to go backwards over the falls. I was trying to get through this massive set wave that was coming in and just about to crush me, and I didn't make it. and I got thrown backwards and held down for a good amount of time. And then there were like 4 other set waves that came that were also just the really big heavy waves and held me down. And I remember feeling like, oh, this is what it feels like to potentially drown. Like, I can't breathe, and coming up for air and being so out of breath that you can't even catch your breath. And I was like waving to my husband, and he swam out and literally like grabbed me by the waist. And I don't even think I was that far offshore at that point. I just was so held down for so long, and grabbed me. And it took me a couple of minutes to just catch my breath again. And it really scared me. It really humbled me. It taught me like, you need to practice breath holds longer. And my parents the whole time still are oblivious. And I didn't even ever tell them about it because they're already scared of all the things I do out here. So I wasn't like, oh, I almost just died and you didn't even know because you were like chatting on the beach. But that was definitely my big scare moment, was just a local break here at Venice.
And my last question is, what is next for you?
Well, good question, Taylor. So I mentioned I'm doing these van events, which has been really fun. They're all it's like a women's wellness, water women's wellness circle, just an opportunity to get together and talk about whatever's going on. I have one coming up on positive aging. And I'm really excited about that topic because I think it's something that we don't talk about enough, and especially as women, as we're getting older. And but also one thing I'm really excited about and experimenting with, I mentioned, is tea. So I continue to have a total coffee addiction. I love coffee. I did a little bit of a cleanse last year, and then I kind of slowly went back to coffee. But one thing that's helped me and really piqued my curiosity is tea and loose leaf tea. So I blend all my own teas, and I started crafting with the help of this herbalist up in Seattle, crafting teas that are good for water women. So teas that I'm still going to be excited about in the morning to get up before I go surfing, and using different herbs and plant medicine that are going to help me with endurance and recovery throughout the day, and things that are going to support my memory and cognitive function, and herbs and things that are going to help me sleep better at night so I can get a really restful sleep and then be stoked to get up in the morning and surf again, or go to Pilates, or edit podcasts all day, whatever we're doing. I think we have these like really busy lives. And I realized for me, again, it wasn't just like one cup of coffee. I work from home, so I would drink coffee like all day, literally all day. And so I was just kind of in a constant state of dehydration, and because coffee is dehydrating, and also putting a lot of demands on my body physically with surfing and Pilates and other things, but also mentally, and like all the things I want to do in a day. So I started learning about, I just have like a cup of ginger and lavender tea in the morning, because ginger wakes up your system. It's good for digestion. And some people are like, oh, you don't really need that coffee in the morning. And I get that, but actually ginger tea has been pretty amazing. And then learning about herbs like ashwagandha and gotu kola, things that are good for memory and endurance, that I'd never even heard those words before. I was like, what's ashwagandha and where does that come from? And it's been a different way to connect me to the earth. It sounds really weird, but like I have all these herbs in my teacup, and it's piqued my curiosity about like, what's gotu kola and where is it sourced, and coming back to that conversation of like, where are things sourced. And people have been using these herbs and these roots for literally thousands of years for medicine, for all different kinds of things. And so right now I'm in the process, like I haven't even announced this yet, but designing specific tea for water women. And I'm working on my first curated recipe with an herbalist, and hopefully will be something that I can put out into the world that will help other people who want to try to learn more about plant medicine and kind of nourish our systems and our cells and everything with things that are benefiting our body. So that's what I'm excited about. That's what's coming up in this year.
That is so interesting. That is really, really interesting to have something. I would love to have something like that. That like if you surf, you are going to need X, Y, and Z for recovery, it's, I've never thought about tea in that way, but that's really, really cool.
Thanks. Yeah, for me either. It was one of those things where when I tried to get off coffee, I was like, okay, I went to the store, I'm looking in the aisles, and I'm like, every tea looks the same. They come in a little packet. A lot of them are in plastic, which, you know, I don't like. So then I started learning about loose leaves, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. And like, oh, I can make my own blends. And I bought a recipe. I was up in Seattle at a tea shop, and I saw this book, this coffee table book, and it was like 101 herbal recipes. So that means like they're caffeine free. And I just started blending and messing around and learning. And I actually reached out to the author of the book, and she's like basically my consultant now on creating this tea.
Wow.
So yeah, she's been so amazing and generous. And there's a particular recipe in the book that's called athlete's tea. And I told her, I was like, Sarah, I've been, you know, drinking this tea for athletes. And she's like, oh, that's actually like, let's create a new recipe, because that's not a great tea for surfers, because if you're out in the water for long periods of time, you can get really dehydrated. And some of the ingredients in that existing recipe are diuretics, so they're actually dehydrating. She's like, you as a water woman need particular herbs that are going to keep you hydrated, not dehydrate you if you're out in the water longer. And I was like, this is why I work with an expert, because she immediately was like, oh, you need this and you need this and you need this. And so I'm testing that recipe, and I'm really excited to curate something specific for water people.
That's incredible. I'm so excited. You have to let me know when that launches. I will definitely get on that.
I'll send you some, Taylor. Yes.
That is so interesting. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow. What that's such a specific thing. I would never think of that, but when you hear it, it makes so much sense.
Yeah. It's so random how these things have continued to unravel, and all as a result of surfing, honestly. It's crazy.
That is incredible. Seriously, that is really, really cool. That was my last question. I was going to say something else and I forgot.
Well, I commend you. I've been skirting getting interviewed for so long now. I always like to be on the other side, asking questions and interviewing, and it's so funny to have the tables turned a little bit and being asked questions. So I was a little nervous because I was like, oh, I don't know. I've never done this before, but you're amazing. And thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
And that was episode 31. I really hope that you guys enjoyed it. If you want to reach out to Stacie, you can shoot her a DM at salted_spirit. That is the main Instagram for her podcast and her. And keep an eye out for her line of surf-specific teas. I just think this was so interesting to learn about, and I'm really looking forward for that product to get on the market. And we have some new little merch items, some newly designed bumper stickers and pins. If you are interested in grabbing one of these for yourself, anyone who donates to our PayPal will get one in the mail. So our PayPal is paypal.me/weirdwavespodcast. Any and all donations will receive a bumper sticker and a little pin. They're really cool, and all of the money helps us support what we're trying to do here, so helps us with equipment, with travel, interviews, all of that stuff. So thanks again to everyone who has listened and supported us thus far, and we will see you next Monday, as always, with another episode.